call this meeting to order. Can we call roll?
Sure. Ken Basinger.
Here.
Jonathan Stone.
Here.
Chair Metzen.
Here.
All right.
All right. So we've got several meetings on the docket today, or items on
Are
the
you
docket
both
today.
all, do you have your microphones all?
Yes, they're on.
Okay, can you
Speak into it.
Yeah.
There we go. Should I start off by reading at this point in time?
Yeah.
Okay. I've got something to read. Bear with me. We'll now commence with the public hearings on agenda item HR 1603, 04, 06, and 07. The criteria for approval of land use action are contained in Chapter 17 of the Oregon City Municipal Code. The proposed development must comply with the applicable provisions contained in the City of Oregon City Comprehensive Plan. Generally, unless otherwise noted, if request is found to be consistent with the municipal code, it is considered consistent with the comprehensive plan. If you wish to participate in this hearing, including challenges or bias or conflicts of interest, you must complete the sign-in form located on the table at the front of the room. I think it's actually at the back of the room from my perspective, and deliver it to staff. Please do so immediately. The chair will only recognize those who have submitted completed forms. Testimony will be taken in the following order: applicant, testimony in favor, testimony in opposition, rebuttal by applicant. When recognized by the chair, please come forward to the podium, give your name, address, and make your statement. All testimony, arguments, and evidence presented regarding this request must be directed towards the applicable criteria or other criteria in the plan or land use regulation which the person believes to apply to the decision. Please address only the applicable criteria for the decision. Please do not repeat testimony. If you wish, you may choose merely to agree with the previous speaker's statements. An issue which may be the basis for an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals shall be raised not later than the close of the record or following the final evidentiary hearing. Such issues shall be raised and accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the Commission and the parties an adequate opportunity to respond to each issue. Failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the decision makers and the parties an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Failure of persons to participate in the public hearing, either orally or in writing, precludes that person's right of appeal to the City Council or LUBA. Written testimony submitted prior to the hearing constitutes participation in the hearing. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues related to the proposed conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the decision maker to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Prior to the conclusion of the initial evidentiary hearing, any participants may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the application. The Commission shall grant such request by continuing the public hearing pursuant to standards contained in ORS 197.763. And with that, let's go to PC 16095, HR 1603.
You want to do the I visited the site.
Oh,
Okay.
has everyone visited the site?
I have.
Okay.
Which one is this?
Okay.
1303 JQ Adams.
Do any of the board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
No.
Neither do I. Okay. Does anybody from the audience wish to provide comment or challenge a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application? All right. I think we're good then.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Chair Metzen. This is for a new detached garage and a designated structure in the McLaughlin Conservation District, as well as a preservation incentive to allow for the adjustments to the corner side setback to place the garage closer to the side street. You can see here on the map, it's at the intersection of JQ Adams and 13th Street. The proposed garage is hashed out. It's a one-story, one-car garage, 14 by 24. In this proposal, the elevations, we see an enclosed soffit, which I'll spell out in a little bit more detail when we get to the conditions of approval, lap siding and a 1/1 window with a divided light, half light door. This shows our 2012 Google Maps view of the Margaret King House is on the top, and then on the bottom you'll see pretty much where the recycle container is, where the existing driveway apron is located. The new driveway apron, if approved, will be slightly to your right to line up with the new. So at some point there was a garage in this location, but it was in a slightly different part of the rear yard. So this is a pretty simple application. Generally, the Historic Review Board has found single-car garages that are detached, especially on secondary parts of the house, add value. A lot of times people, when you put money into a accessory building, the value of the property goes up, and therefore intend to have more interest in maintaining the historic house in general. In this situation, the applicant in their submittal did propose some materials which do not meet the design guidelines for new construction. The applicant, either on mistake, using kind of a standard design materials, or on purpose, proposed vinyl siding, which is not allowed, and then did not provide enough information on the windows. So if you'll notice here under 6, I've identified the different materials based on the design guidelines for new construction, which are allowed. Kind of these are the clear and objective conditions for doors, materials, and for the side door, the garage door, the siding, and the windows. Secondly, they proposed enclosed soffit, which you'll kind of see here. And if you'll notice from the Margaret King House, they do not have a closed soffit. So I recommend that the applicant at the time of building permit comes in for a revised drawing that does not show closed soffits. Denise McGriff, the McLaughlin Neighbor Association, turned in comments related to not having enough information and requested a continuance for this application. Per ORS, we're actually required to continue it. I was hoping she'd be here tonight. She can remove that request for continuance if she finds that the proposed conditions of approval are satisfactory to the concern that she had when she initially turned in her comments before the staff report.
Okay.
I sent her an email. What I would like to do is potentially we can go through the kind of deliberation and public comment, and maybe wait till the end of the meeting to make a final decision. And if we can't get a hold of her about her request for continuance, we will have to move forward and request it to the next month, or if she removes that request, we can move forward on your recommendations and approval. As the way the ORS works, if someone asks for a request for continuance on the first night of the hearing, we are obligated to continue it.
So how long do we have for her to remove that request? Does it
This hearing.
has to
So
be
my
before the end of the hearing?
recommendation
Okay.
is, I know she made comments on an application coming up, so I'm hoping she's just late. I sent her an email, so hopefully we'll hear from you. So my recommendation is to go through public comments, go through deliberation, but hold off on the vote until the end of the meeting.
All right.
She doesn't usually check her email until 12:30 in the morning. So
That's true.
She isn't? Well, then unfortunately we're
Okay.
going to have to continue. But we can do
All right.
everything up until the end and provide the applicant their clearest direction, so at least they understand kind of the next steps, but without actually making the final decision.
Great. At this point in time, can we invite the applicant up?
He's not here this evening.
Oh, he's not.
No.
Oh,
I would be inclined to suggest that the conclusion and recommendations from staff are pretty straightforward. I don't know what else we would suggest.
Yeah, maybe we can open it for public comment too.
yeah. I guess we can do that then. Open it up to public comment. Does anyone have comments? Well, this might be the fastest one this evening.
No, well, it's not a
I
decision
did. I was wondering if they got into why they chose a 412 pitch instead of a 612, which
They're allowed to do a 412 per the design guidelines.
okay.
I think the idea is garages are secondary in nature, and they were generally built in the 1920s, which often had a 412 pitch.
Okay.
Whereas you have an 1890s, 1900 house, they didn't have the one-car garage built to match the pitch of the original house often, because in the 20s you built more of a bungalow-style garage.
Okay. Very good.
So my recommendation is to hold off till the final decision in case we get an email till the end of the meeting.
Okay. We
'Cause
will.
once we make the decision, we've made decisions.
All right. We'll table that item then.
Okay.
So we'll move on to HR 1604. Do any of the board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
No.
No.
I do not. Who has visited the site?
I have.
Okay, we all
I'm
have.
a nearby neighbor, but I haven't specifically visited the site for this particular hearing.
Okay. Does anybody from the audience wish to provide comment or challenge a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application? Okay, perfect. With that, Christine, it's back to you.
Thank you, Chair Mitzen. So this is a request for a front addition and rear addition on one of the cutest little houses we ever have in the McLaughlin Conservation District. And I think everyone can acknowledge that this is a very constrained structure with lots of different additions over time. The applicant, you can see, is proposing a front addition to extend the kitchen and then a rear addition in the back. This shows the front addition that goes out 6 feet. You'll notice that they are proposing to take the 2 non-historic windows and non-historic detailing and bring back a window that matches. This shows the side elevation where you can see the rear addition. And then this is looking from the promenade east to the rear. Here's some photos of the site. This is on High Street looking at the property, and you'll notice right here is where kind of the issue, a question that I'm going to be asking the Historic Review Board on, which is the proposed to take the front addition 6 feet with 2 new parallel windows. This is the existing rear, and so you'll see from the back there are already additions that have been added onto the house, and so this addition takes it right here. So in this situation, what I would like the Historic Review Board to look at specifically is the front addition. Staff recommends approval of the rear addition. I think it clearly meets the design standards for new construction. Denise McGriff of the Neighborhood Association supported the rear addition. Our Public Works Department did have some comments regarding access, but I've indicated there's nothing being proposed regarding Promenade Street access, so I let the property owners know that Public Works can work with them at any time outside of this land use process because they're not actually proposing any changes to their access. You'll see on condition number 4 shows the material design that is kind of a lot like the new construction you saw, the kind of the materials that are approved for this. But in this situation, you have an applicant proposing a pretty substantial addition to the front of the house. And as you know, that's generally not a default approval. And so what I'd like the board to do, I'll explain a little bit of the thought process, and then Todd Eislin, who's helping the owners, will come up and be able to kind of talk it through. And if the board finds that in this situation, kind of the net positive to the property can be found and kind of you support the front addition, I'll be looking forward as staff to get specific findings for approval in your decision. Because what I want to make sure what we do is we don't set a precedent and we say kind of front additions are very site specific and very case by case. So as the next people come in, we are not saying, oh, it was done at this house, then you can do it. It's really, in this situation, why is it appropriate? And so that's what I'm really looking for. And if you find that this addition is not appropriate or should not be approved or cannot be a conditioned approval, that's fine too. But I think if you do support the neighbor association, the owner, I am looking for specific findings to help me out in the future.
Okay.
So I do know that there was discussion about, and I'm showing this picture here, do you add to this very small little house's kitchen? Do you go out to the side, but now you've widened that front pitched entry area by kind of you'll see there's a little indent area right here. And so there's a question of, does that fundamentally change the look because you've now expanded kind of that mass to be wider? Coming out to the front, now you have this front addition kind of protruding out. If you do go onto the site, you will notice in this porch area right here that this front addition is slightly in front. I mean, this house has changed multiple times over the years. So there is some precedent, but you're going from, a couple inches for a foot to 6 feet in front of the porch. But there is this detailing right here is a non-historic little add-on. So at some point, these did have 1/1 windows. So that is all I have right now, and I know the applicant is excited to come up and talk to you about their proposal.
Okay, we'll invite the applicant up then. And please state your name and address for the record.
I'm Josh Adams, 311 High Street, property owner.
Todd Iceland, Iceland Architects, 1307 7th Street. We proposed the addition on the front reluctantly. As Christina said, it's something that normally you wouldn't propose on a historic home, but this site is very constrained, and widening the house to the little L shape infill that Christina had mentioned, we kind of briefly looked at.
You want to put this down?
There were a couple issues with it. One is it widens that, and then it actually changes the proportions, bringing it straight out forward, as Josh is proposing, actually keeps the form of the cross gable coming out to the front. And we wouldn't be altering that in any way except bringing it out another 6 feet, which is really the minimal they need to have a workable kitchen. It is a very tight little home. It was probably a cottage for the mill workers originally, and it's been added on to at least 3 times, I think.
In every direction.
Yeah. So what we're trying to do is do something that is in character, and actually by adding new windows in, replacing the aluminum windows there and getting rid of the fake surround that's there, bringing it closer to what probably should have been there originally. We've got a lot of room in the front yard. We're actually not any closer than any of the adjacent properties. And I think Ms. McGriff's comments about the economic viability of this addition are very pertinent in this case as well. Anything else to add?
Really, the only thing that I'd like to add is just we've just moved into the area 2 months ago, but we really do enjoy the area, and the additions we're proposing aren't extravagant. They're strictly for living, adding a second bedroom and expanding the kitchen to where it's usable for us. Right now, the kitchen, the fridge, and the stove are side by side. There's just barely enough room in there to stand in, let alone cook. And we need a dishwasher. I would like one. So these are just bare minimal of what we can do to continue growing our family in this house.
And Josh and Jenna are doing all the work themselves, and along with family members, and I've just been trying to support them and guide them a little bit. So,
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant?
I don't.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
You are doing it the old-fashioned way.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. Do we have any testimony in favor? Do we have any testimony in opposition? Well, I won't make you come back and rebut anyone. Then we will go to discussion. Okay. Jonathan, can we start with you?
I mean, I think Denise's point about economic viability of the site matters. The additions seem kind of in keeping with the tradition of the house. Restoring the windows to something a bit more historically appropriate on the front, I think, would improve the character of the facade of the house. And as we think about sort of historic preservation, we also have to think about how do people use it, and is this, if we just turn it into a little museum, I'm not sure that's the best use of this house. So the additions, to me, the front one especially, I understand it's non-conventional, but seems to be in keeping with the scale of everything. So I'd be inclined to support this proposal with the findings that Christina was recommending or suggesting we might include.
Okay.
In the absence of any contradictory testimony, I would support the applicant.
Okay. So when I think about the Secretary of Interior standards for historic preservation, one of those guidelines is, can it be removed? And not that we're suggesting, you're doing it because you want to do this, and I think anyone who bought the house would thank you after you. But this could be removed, looking at a site specific basis. I agree with Jonathan's comments. I think those 3 items are findings in which we could attach to this approval. And I would entertain a motion to approve HR 1604.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Ken
Oh.
Basinger,
Aye.
Jonathan Stone,
Aye.
Derek Metzen.
Aye.
Motion carries with additional findings.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And good luck. Looks like a lot of fun.
So do you know that you want to move forward with building permits soon? So I'll work with you this week on that transition and get the notice of decision out. Okay?
I actually think it's pretty cool. I mean, the additions that were probably made in the past were probably pretty homegrown additions too, right? I mean, so yeah.
Totally fits. Yeah. And those hand drawings are really nicely done. Nice, clear, legible. Yeah. Thank you for that. We will go on to HR 1606, approval of a new single-family residence, Kenema National Register District.
Just 1 second.
Okay, I'll just ask, do any of the board members have conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
No.
Nope.
Nope. Who has visited the site?
I have.
Okay.
This is the one that I meant to say that I live nearby, but I was familiar with the previous structure. I was just confused on which one was coming up on my screen. So.
I have not visited this site recently, but I am familiar with the site as well. And does anyone from the audience have, does anybody from the audience wish to provide comment or challenge a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application? No. Excellent. Christine, I'll turn it back to you.
Well, thank you. This is approval of a new single-family residence in the Kenema National Register District. The applicant is additionally requesting a preservation incentive to allow for adjustments to the front setback. This application is based off a previously approved but expired HR 1302 application. The applicant, as with the last application in HR 1302, is choosing to do a bifurcated process where they'll move forward with the Historic Review Board approval and then continue with geologic hazards through this Type 2 administrative review, which is appealable to City Commission. So if there's anything through the geologic hazards process that will require revisions to the approved drawing, they will be required to come back to the Historic Review Board. But they are choosing and can do this kind of parallel process. So just to remind everybody where we are, this is 625 4th Avenue. This is a 2012 Google map and going south on the property. So the property is a downslope site to your right. This is actually looking north, so it's on your left. This application, the new applicants have chosen to take the plans from the previous application completely and resubmit them. And so many of the comments you see in the staff report were based on some of the original findings from HR 1302, as well as the appeal that came out, which is AP 1301, I believe. And so these have been identified. And so one thing that the board can do when they move forward, if they choose to approve this, is to approve the staff report. But I also included in the record for tonight is the memo from the appeal from last time. And so the board can choose if they want to kind of accept the findings or reconfirm, I guess, the findings in the appeal memo. So in a sense, you're kind of carrying the full findings from last time, both the historic and the appeal, into the record if it goes to appeal again.
Okay.
So keeping the record moving kind of package forward. This is a 1.5-story vernacular with a daylight basement. We're going to talk a little bit about the breezeway a little bit later, but you'll notice it has an attached breezeway with just the roof. There is no side walls. This is at the rear looking up with a daylight basement. So this is looking on the upslope. This is looking on a side elevation. This is actually nearest the historic house. This is the perspective level from 4th Avenue.
Can I ask?
Sure.
This is distorted, isn't it? I
It
remember.
might have been, and if it is, it's my inability to put things on a PowerPoint. So
Okay.
what I can do is I have the version on the staff report, and I can bring it up when I'm done if you want
Okay.
to.
I remember this application. I don't think Ken was here, and I figured I would just say that for the audience's
Okay, yes.
convenience. That
And it could have just been me this afternoon trying to paste something and put it in a PowerPoint. So I'm happy to, when we're done with this presentation, I'll bring up this side elevation just for the record.
So for everyone's
There,
reference, it
yeah.
is wider. It is squinched in this direction.
You can see the difference.
Yeah, you totally can.
So this is showing the perspective drawing from 4th. In the 2013 application, the Historic Review Board, which some of you were not on, 2013 actually did make a finding that attaching the breezeway was acceptable. And how they went through that was they requested a preservation incentive, and the board could look at kind of the definition of attached as relates to setbacks. And they did move forward, and that did receive approval by the City Commission on Appeal. Initially, staff did not recommend the breezeway addition, but that Historic Review Board did make findings of support. And so on my end, knowing that we have a different Historic Review Board, that's one thing for you to think about today. Do you still want to continue with that recommendation? I know we have a work plan item over the years, which we've not been able to move forward on, which is the larger discussion about breezeways in new construction, as additions, when appropriate, to provide more guidance, both the staff and the neighborhood. The design guidelines for new construction are a little gray on breezeways, and so this is an opportunity if the board has strong feelings. They can move forward and request removal of the breezeway. They could move forward and accept the breezeway, kind of making findings that it was part of a previous application moving forward, and even if the kind of policy will change in the future, they'll kind of acknowledge this as a kind of an existing proposal, or move forward and say, we think that this breezeway is appropriate here and could be appropriate in other places. So I'm just kind of generally looking for direction from the board and kind of how we in the future want to look at breezeways. And so those are some options the board could take tonight regarding breezeways. The conditions of approval are generally from the last application, and they were moved forward from the appeal. What I would like to highlight, there was some discussion about moving the garage farther down the hill to allow a better site view of the historic house next door. However, the inherent problem is when you are building a garage on a downslope, the farther you push it back, the farther you're pushing it down the hill, and either having driveway issues and also potentially massing issues because you're having a steeper slope at the end. And then there's a large cedar tree back behind, and I will go back to show here we go. So you'll see the cedar tree right here inside the adjacent structure. So the larger question is, completely moving this back so you can see the historic house, which is right here, probably isn't practicable for the garage. So the board and the last application did make the finding that while it could be set back a little bit to help, it shouldn't be set back in any way hurting the drip line of the cedar tree that was kind of right at the property line between the two properties. So that condition of approval has remained. Let me go back. Let's see. The standard conditions about materials are there. There was some question with the previous owner about a new survey related to the actual kind of putting that proposed house in its place. And I think the question was if it might reduce the breezeway but at no time should it have less than a 5-foot separation between the garage and the maze house. Let's see. I know there was a comment last time and as well this time with Mr. Edgar regarding the utility easement that's on the property of the vacated part of Apperson. And as with the last application, the owner will work with the Public Works Department about the particulars relating to the existing easement that is on there and how to place any additional public utilities through it. So that's really a one-on-one discussion with our Public Works Department.
Okay.
Let me see if I have anything else. I do not. So I don't actually see the applicant here tonight. I will be happy to answer any question, and I know we have people here ready for public comment.
Okay. I don't have any questions about this application. Ken?
I have the application here. I don't have the applicant. So, as I went through this material, I thought I noticed that at one point the breezeway was not approved, and then it was approved. But in looking at the drawings, the roof structure over the breezeway becomes fairly substantial in appearance. And I think I'd favor not having it.
We might want to wait for deliberation until public comment.
Yeah, okay.
So opportunity for questions. Did you have any questions?
I do not have questions.
Okay. John? Okay. And with that, we will request or invite testimony in favor. Is this in favor or opposition?
I don't know.
Okay. Well, Paul, will you join us? State your name and address for the record, please.
Paul Edgar, Oregon City, Kanema. We presented, and I would say there was a document that was sent in that I delivered, but this document was not prepared by me. It was prepared by a group of us from Kanema, and I was the deliverer of it. And it was a joint effort written by third parties with an agreement of, we have a new person who's responsible for the kind of the interface for land use issues for Kanema. And he and one of the other kind of members of our group sat down together and wrote these comments. And this was about what the neighborhood association, we have about 10 neighbors.
Well, Paul, I
that
want to make sure we
endorses.
get to the point of
Okay.
what your comments are.
And just so you know
Okay.
that this public
Well,
comment is attached.
Following that outline, do you have that
Yeah.
that document? Okay. We feel that the house should be equal in height, and if you take a look up there with the house next door, so as that it doesn't detract. And this is just the way the site deal on page 34 of the building guidelines talk about siting, and this is to be in relationship to what our own building guidelines call for. We also feel that the spacing between, on page 36 of the building guidelines, we get talking about setback and how close it should be to the property line. And with the garage right now is within 3 feet of the property line. The consensus of everyone was if the design could be flip-flopped and the garage on the other side, just take this deal and move if it could be set back. That would then minimize the way it shields the view of the historic house, which is a significant historic house right next to it. And so that was one of the thinking that was part of the thing. There was a consensus of people saying that the garage should not have the breezeway. But again, that's we feel that creates the mass problem, where all of a sudden the building is 66.5 feet wide in relationship to any other house in Kanema. This is inappropriate in mass. When I go to the document, and this document, which was done by the Historic Preservation League of Oregon. It gets into definitive descriptions of what mass should be and how it should be applied as a wording. So it tries to simplify the interpretation of the word mass. So this one at 66.5 feet in relationship to other houses, even if they were L-shaped, is completely out of proportion. Let me simplify through this. We went through each one of the sections of the Oregon City Building Guidelines for Historic Houses and tried to identify each of these things based upon going back to the individual page where they are in the building guidelines and show how they don't represent what is appropriate in a sense, so that we don't create some new model in a drip, drip, drip of changing in a revisionary mindset what is in our building guidelines.
Okay.
We have 2 more minutes.
One of the other issues of this is where we have our hope was, and it was talked about a long time ago in this, is that during the historic preservation workshop on windows, we got into this document that tells us on HRB policy 10, which is on window design, and it talks about in that guidelines, it talks about how a window should not detract. It's the eyes of the building. And so it is within that mindset that we would hope that the windows on at least the front side, the visual side that people see, would be appropriately compatible or comparable with the immediate houses next door and the one across the street, which are two of the more significant historic structures in Kenema on 4th Avenue. There's also talking about setbacks and how close we can get, and there was a discussion about on 3rd Avenue. Well, this is 4th Avenue. So in a previous writing up about what can be done, well, they were talking about a completely different street. And so there are no setback rules or allowances on 4th Avenue. There are on 3rd Avenue.
Okay, thank you, Paul. I've got one question for you.
Yeah.
What about, you went through the list and found the things that you didn't think were compatible. Just briefly, what did you think was compatible about this application?
I think that the house can be a good house, and it could be a contributing house. And
What specific items did you feel met the criteria?
well, I think that to me, this is my personal opinion, is the detracting thing
No,
is just one of them is attaching the garage the way it is.
what did you feel met the criteria?
Well, I like the fact that it's a vernacular design. Okay, and I like the fact that it has a 12-12 or a comparable pitch roof.
Okay.
Okay, and the ability, if we could take care of what I call we'll say is the superficial things, little things, like windows, and trying to slim it down.
Okay.
Where it does not detract from the immediate houses.
Mhm.
The house across the street
Okay.
is like 32 feet.
Thank
And the
you,
one
Paul.
next to it.
Thank
is-
you very much. I appreciate your time. Okay, and I didn't see anyone come in, so the applicant is not here? Well, I know you do, Christina, but please continue to strongly encourage applicants to show up to these meetings. Yeah.
I know that the applicants are very excited to move forward, and they were notified, and they really would like an approval. And
Okay.
I've not indicated anything that from what I've heard, if the breezeway is an issue, I think I'm speaking for them, so I can't speak for them, but they're highly anticipating an approval, and I think if it comes down to kind of one or two questions, they can come back with a revised and pay for a revised application if they really are not supportive of the conditions of approval
Mhm.
and do a revised version. But I have
Yeah.
not heard. They're very supportive of basically submitting what was submitted for the last application and moving forward with that.
Yeah, yeah. I recall this happening once before, since I've been on the board, and we actually had changes to that application that we insisted on. Maybe twice before. In any case, I think it's important that the applicant shows up when it's anticipated that it would be contested.
Yep.
That being said, I have no interest in fighting for or against any application. I just want to throw that out there, Paul. I'm just evaluating the criteria we have. But I will say that we reviewed this in depth last time. This appears to be an identical application, and I agree with the staff recommendations of conditions of approval, along with that are revised with the conditions that were added in the appeal. So, Jonathan, any comments, thoughts you want to share?
I wasn't part of the original review of this, and so I'm a little disappointed that the applicant isn't here in terms of being able to speak directly to the specific concerns. It's not often we receive this very specific feedback, criteria by criteria. So, I mean, these are Christina's staff sort of proposed findings for the criteria. I just wish we'd had an opportunity to hear directly from the applicant. And were they at the previous hearing?
It's a different applicant.
Oh,
They
so-
purchased the property and bought the plans.
I see. Okay.
Yes. Basically, they bought the project. This was designed by a residential designer in coordination with a single-family home developer who looked at how to develop this site. They came in several times for design advice meetings, I think twice on this site, before submitting an application, which we reviewed. They made a number of changes regarding the massing, bringing the roof down, changing the type of windows, adjusting the roof porch, or the porch roof to get some windows of a better proportion on the second floor. We had them change the railing on the back deck and adjust the proportions and placement of posts so that it was it didn't fit the interior plan as well, but it made more sense on the exterior to fit the design guidelines. We had a lot of conversation about that breezeway and the garage itself. And as I recall, it came down to a site-specific finding of if you attach that garage, though the house gets narrower, the massing gets larger. And that is a concern. When you have that breezeway going through there, the roof connecting them is a little bit narrower. You can see through the house at that point in time. And though the overall width is a factor, the feeling of the house is really what makes the massing. Because you can bury a 10,000 square foot house in the ground and make it look small. Or you can stick it up on pedestals and make it look much, much larger. And so we were encouraging breaking down that massing. And so that was an attempt to do that. Not to talk over you, but just to give you some background. Ken?
Where did we end up on the roof pitch? In here, it's in some places 10, 12, and
Yeah, it is 12-12. So it is 12-12 on the front. There was some recommendation for the side L wing to go down to 10-12, but the board denied that in the last application.
okay.
And the reason for that was when you decrease that pitch, the roof got about 2 feet shallower and then made that center massing look pretty darn large. And so we felt that pitch on the side helped from that front elevation as you're driving along the side in that perspective. The wing that heads north-south on the right-hand side, the way that roof interacted with the main element in the center there was just looked a whole lot better, in our opinion. In my opinion,
Okay.
it still does.
So I'm looking at two documents. One is a 2013 document, July 26th, stating the conditions of approval at that time, which I assume to be a summary of what you folks did on the board
Yeah.
back then. And then looking at the recommended conditions of approval on the staff report here. They are coincidentally very much alike.
Oops, I have the wrong one. Excuse me. I have too many PowerPoint.
The one item that is not the same is on the 2013 conditions of approval. Item number 9 was removal of the breezeway.
So that is the kind of the last direction I'm looking for from the board is, can the applicant retain the breezeway as proposed, retain the breezeway as conditioned, or remove the breezeway, and what are your findings for that?
Okay.
I mean, the purpose of the breezeway is just so they don't get wet, or it's serving some other land use need in terms of the, as you mentioned in your presentation, I'm sorry,
Yeah. I'm going to do my best to recall the findings from the last historic review board. I know that there was, it was not fully unanimous, but there was direction by some of the board members for the breezeway, and that, or supporting the proposed breezeway because of its, that it was just a roof breezeway and it was set back from, you'll notice it's set back in kind of the middle of the garage. And so it's actually further back. It's hard to see on a non-perspective drawing. So that was a finding they made. We've generally not allowed breezeways as a default. And as you recall, it has been a while. This was really one of the first new constructions since the 2006 design guidelines were adopted. And so pretty much ever since this application, it's kind of been an open question about the policies regarding breezeways, both in McLaughlin and Kenema. And so I kind of circle back to what I mentioned at the beginning. I think on a staff level, there's many tacks the Historic Review Board could take, and I'll repeat them again. One is kind of adopting allowing the breezeway to move forward, kind of with the original findings from the Historic Review Board about, its simple placement, and I think Chair Metzen can add a little bit there because he was there, and kind of allowing an existing application that has been resubmitted to kind of continue. The other would be to make, is there a conditional approval, or say in this specific situation, for this reason, we think it's acceptable, and kind of a lot like the last application, kind of make your specific findings, or condition something else, or potentially move forward to not allow the breezeway. And provide findings for that. I do know that it was not unanimous last time, and we have different board members, and it's a policy issue we haven't really been able to fully wrestle with. And so I'm kind of, in a sense, sending it back to the Historic Review Board. I do know that there's, it's a little vague in our design guidelines about the use of breezeways.
Yeah, and I will say that the applicant who initially proposed this, not this applicant, but the same application from the previous applicant, proposed a breezeway in a new house that he constructed over by the old high school. I don't remember the address, but that was going to be appealed, and he removed it voluntarily in order to avoid an appeal. Yeah, it's something the community has said they don't appreciate, or folks in the community have said that. But we have no stated guidelines, so we have discretion.
I think it's a little tacky, personally.
So, do you have any other comments?
I mean, the biggest issue I have is with the breezeway, and so it just to me, it's kind of strange how it engages the roof on the side of the house, and I mean the roof that's pretty big. So that's my primary issue with this, and it seems like, I mean, but I also, we're a different board at this point. We have, but this is being brought back before us again. I mean, I don't want to get in the way of preventing this project from moving forward, but maybe they can come back to us with a breezeway proposal in the future if they care about it that much.
I would say that it is also we could approve this with the condition of approval that the breezeway goes away.
That's what I'm
That's what you're
suggesting.
suggesting?
Yeah.
Okay.
And if they feel very strongly about it, then they can come back.
Okay. Okay.
Are we deliberating now?
We are deliberating.
I'm looking at the slide that's up right now
Mhm.
and seeing the contour line at the curb, which slopes slightly upward from the left side to the right side.
Mhm.
And at the same time, I'm looking at the ground level at the location of the foundation, seeing that it slopes sharply the other way from left downward to the right, probably 8 to 10 feet, which makes the proposal to build the house in mirror image, I think, impractical, because it puts the garage down another 8 to 10 feet below grade when it's already steep enough driveway. We have plenty of killer driveways. We don't need another one.
You don't want a drive-through garage? Okay. Is that by chance the applicant that walked in?
No.
Okay.
No, that is Ron Weistlein from Kanema.
Okay. So we have several comments on the table. Do we have a motion?
I would move to approve the application subject to the 8 conditions stated by staff and the addition of the 9th condition regarding removal of the breezeway.
Okay. Do we have a second?
A second.
All right.
Okay. Let's see. Mr. Basinger,
Aye.
Mr. Stone,
Aye.
Chair Midson.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.
Thank you very much. Okay.
Okay. Our last,
We're getting to it. Okay. On to HR 1607. I'll read this one more time. Do any of the board members have a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application?
Not I.
No.
Nope. Who has visited the site?
I have.
I have.
We finally got this one correct. This is the one I live near. I'm sorry. I kept
You've
hitting-
moved a lot lately.
You get around.
Okay.
So I apologize. I don't actually live in Kanema, so and I didn't intend to suggest that I did. I was just hitting the wrong button on the screen. So by order of elimination, we are now actually at the place that I live near.
Okay.
So
And actually, I will say, we did have ex parte contact before the meeting started, and I said, I'm amazed they are adding on to this house, and it's not being torn down. That was a comment I made. So, between Jonathan and I. So, does anyone from the audience wish to provide comment or challenge a conflict of interest or ex parte contact regarding this application? Excellent. Okay. With that, we turn it over to you, Christina.
So we're continuing our tiny house segment of the evening.
Yeah.
There's a television show.
This application, I actually don't have a full staff report, and I am requesting continuation. The applicant was able to give me kind of, we call it an option B, too soon for me to write a staff report and notice it out to the neighbors and allow kind of enough time for full comment. So I'm going to run through the staff report today, provide you kind of a background on the option A and B. The applicants are here today. And you can have a conversation with them. And I think really what we're kind of getting here is how much direction can you provide kind of everyone through this process without actually going through the deliberation and voting on this application. So when we are at a place at the October meeting, they have kind of clear direction. It's non-binding, not final, but they have clear direction on kind of next steps. And then we also have time to make sure that kind of all the neighbors and the Neighborhood Association and Park Place have a chance to really look at this option B.
Okay.
So that's my request for this evening. So I'll run through this presentation with you. Well, actually, I have to get my staff report.
Cute.
So this is a front addition of a locally designated landmark located in Park Place. And as you can see, it is a tiny, 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 tiny building. One thing that is not brought up here, and is one thing the board can potentially look at, is that, while this situation, it's one of these things where it's in fair to poor condition, but it actually generally has integrity, and integrity doesn't necessarily mean it's, you can have something in poor condition but have integrity. And so is this eligible for de-designation? And they just build a new design, new construction, maybe as a condition of approval meets the design guidelines for new construction. That wasn't brought up, but it's something the board could look at tonight. Look at these two options, give direction, or kind of give direction for a third option. So I think really, in a sense, this is some design advice wrapped up in the first phase of a land use application.
Okay.
So you can see this is showing the house. We have, this is from Hiram. Here's the long tax lot. The applicant is looking at doing a minor partition at some point, but they want to move forward with rehab of this house before they move forward with a minor partition on the rear of the lot on Rock Street. So the first option, which as staff I did not recommend, which is in a sense adding on to the point where the actual historic volume got lost in the rehab. So you kind of doubled the width of the garage, and at the end of the day that you really couldn't tell where the existing historic house was. So you can see this option 1 on the left is existing, and what was proposed is on the right. So it was kind of swallowed up by the addition. So I gave indication to the applicant that I as staff would not recommend approval of this option because it did not meet the Secretary of Interior standards for addition or our standards for addition. So they went kind of back and looked at some of the different opportunities of how do you do an addition to a tiny, tiny, tiny cottage, but at the end of the day still have some semblance of where the cottage was historic volume. And as you know, it's adding on to small structures is hard unless you're adding a tiny addition onto a small structure. So and this is their proposal. So you'll see they try to keep the front the front volume here, but you'll notice there is kind of this secondary porch, but it's set back. So the idea is to try to see this volume as the historic volume. So here's kind of showing. Oops, I apologize. I need to go to slideshow so you don't see the background. So this kind of shows existing and then this addition. Existing and then the addition. So before you had this option 1, there was another option 1.5, which the applicant did move forward, and I can provide it, but it was the interim design, and it showed more of a hipped roof, kind of, like a hipped roof volume here, and it looked very much like a 40s building was attached. to this. And so I kind of gave a little recommendation to try to have the addition match a little bit in roof pitch. Excuse me. On this end, the materials, I think the standard conditions of approval will be added on if this is, you think, is a reasonable attempt at adding square footage onto a small house and still keeping it, or are there other alternatives that staff didn't, or the applicant didn't recommend that you thought would be appropriate of how to move forward with a really skinny, long corner lot that will be partitioned at one point in this really, really, really small designated cottage that's in the front? I'm going to go back to the existing conditions so you can. So I know we have the applicant, and they're definitely ready to
Okay.
make public comment.
All right, so I'll invite the applicant up.
Can I ask for a 1 minute break?
Oh, I'm sorry. Can we take a 1 minute break?
Just apologize 1 second.
Yeah.
Are you getting the drinks? I just wondered if he's getting the drinks.
So, gotta do.
But we wish they would open the locks so that we could escape from the upper river.
Yeah,
Well, that can all come up as one pair.
they all come up together.
Yeah.
That's
You can grab your chair. I've still paused for right now, and I'm just doing a quick check
Okay.
to see. I'm having trouble getting my email.
Yeah.
So we were all set to take the boat out Sunday and stay overnight up at Sheen.
right, and we have the applicant up here. Please introduce yourself and provide your address for the record.
I'm Kevin Granger, 16430 Highland.
Maureen Granger, 16430 Hiram, Oregon City.
Victor Kuprikov, 12504 Southeast Mill Street, Portland, Oregon.
Okay. Excellent. So tell us about the application.
Well, just kind of as an overview, we looked at this and kind of saw maybe a diamond in the rough, and I like Jonathan's description earlier, where he said, some of these had been kind of homegrown additions that were on this. You can't see from this view, but on that other view, they had actually done a little addition where they set it back about 4 feet. Yeah, there. You can kind of see. And, the house right now obviously needs a lot of repairs, and the integrity of the roof and the side wall over there, it isn't there. The renter had done his best effort to kind of keep the roof intact there, but it's to a point now where something has to be done. I mean, I would describe it now pretty much as uninhabitable. So then we came up with the idea of, what are the options? A lot of the input that we had just from everybody from passerbyers to a little more sophisticated observers were saying, this is a tear down. Your other option is, try to salvage it, keep the historic home. And the more we looked at it, we thought, there is that definite possibility. But we did want to take the opportunity to increase the square footage. And so that's where, Victor came in and came up with that plan. And I think I like the Plan B that was described there. Option 2.
Well, the proposal depicts a remodeling work of an existing portion of the house. And also the scope of the project includes the enlargement of the existing area, by constructing an addition to the north and the east side of the house. So, and of course, the intention of the design is to differentiate clearly the original house and proposed addition to both sides of the house. And we are looking at we're trying to propose the design that will show front and the side offsets at where the new and existing structures met. The front offset of the new structure is to be 4 feet along the Hiram Avenue. And along the Rock Street, there's 2 feet offset. So the proposed increase of an existing house to be total plus or minus 287 square foot, which is 44% increase, which will bring the total living area of the house up to 939 square feet. And you can refer to the site plan. As you can see on the site plan, there's a setback 7'6" setback on the north.
Sorry, there we go.
On the north side of the house, and we remain the same setbacks on the front and on the side along the Rock Street.
Okay. Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
Sure. There's a lot of distance between the existing structure and the garage, which I guess is to be removed. It kind of looks like why not just build an independent house and then use the existing structure as kind of like a preserve it, but you don't necessarily have to spend a lot of investment into making it stable and not continuing to fall apart. But could you put a secondary structure in the back? I'm just wondering, because the addition's rather large compared to this house. I mean, like any addition is going to be rather large compared to the house, but it would seem to me that it would lose the character of the original structure. I like the fact that option 2 separates gives the addition a bit more articulation from the existing structure. But I guess my question is, or a confirmation rather, does the addition meet our criteria for new construction?
It is more than 30%. I mean, it's addition. I mean, it's attached to the house, so I guess it's kind of both. We've done kind of that before. Actually, a good example of that is that addition to the Atkinson Memorial Church. We kind of actually use both design guidelines, so we could continue to look at the design guidelines for new construction as in the revised staff report. I think one thing that that wasn't done was, and I know that talking to the applicant, there was some discussion about, accessory dwelling unit, and then the design to create and have this be the ADU, and then whatever historic preservation incentives that are needed to fiddle with that. But I think there's things in the ADU code that we don't have ability to change. So I recalling I know there was a look at that as an option, but it was rejected, and I can't remember why it was rejected. To look at ADU as an option and then have just a new construction next door, but it's all one house,
Wait, you did look at having this as its own building at some point in
I think
time?
months and months ago, and I can't remember.
It was just something that we thought we might do based on another planner that was in the offices that said that we could consider an ADU, but we do not want to go forward with an ADU at this point.
Because it's owner occupied, that's what it is, right? You have to be in one, that's right. I knew there was a reason why ADU didn't work.
Which he did not seem to know that that was a criteria.
Yeah.
I can tell you that criteria should change. It's not.
I don't disagree.
It's not in our purview, but I'm on the record, so please continue.
Yeah, so I think that, one of the things, just to address your issue, we do want to preserve this tiny little home and add.
Yeah, there should be both have a little red dot. Maybe are they both not on?
It's on. It's just too far away.
Oh, just scoot up.
All right, sorry. That doesn't work. Okay, so we do want to preserve that tiny little shack, and in fact, as you go into it, or that space is not tiny when you're seeing the inside of that house. It looks smaller on the outside, but so I don't know why we would do something, that the addition is under 50%, and the garage is definitely coming down. That was just I think it was a 1950s build. But it's not something that we're going to maintain, and if we ever did do a garage, it would be closer to the home. The little, that tiny home.
Well, I looked at option 1, and my comments to Jonathan were simply that. The way in which you were adding on to the house, I saw that nothing was going to remain or stay. And I agreed with Christina's comments that it probably would not have gotten approved because there was nothing left of the existing house. This one I see is keeping the integrity of the existing house. The overall design in the roof form is, in my opinion, where we're not hitting the mark. So, Victor, you've got a design challenge here, and I don't have a solution for you. But I can tell you, it's the roof that's going to hold you up. Because as we bring these two gable roofs together and we have just a little valley that we're shedding water on the sides, that is not a historically appropriate solution. And I don't, I see it as the most cost-effective solution, but unfortunately we have to look at what is historically appropriate. And I'm glad that you guys are keeping this house. And I give you kudos for that. If you need to pick it up and move it back behind and not turn it into an ADU at this point in time until the city can make changes to their regulations or find some other use for it, that is fine. I would encourage you to look at vernacular buildings because that's essentially what you're creating. Vernacular buildings are typically single-room buildings that get added to over time. They have this muddled-up feel of you've got the main portion and then additions onto it that come off at, to a lesser extent where the roofs aren't competing. You've got kind of the inverse of most vernacular buildings in which the primary house is the main element and then everything added off of it is submissive to that main element, that main massing. The house is so small, it's going to be the submissive portion. It's going to fall in line with the rest of it. I don't feel that this house needs to be, this existing building needs to be the front portion, but what's proposed is not working.
One thing you said, I didn't quite understand when you said you could consider moving it back.
You can pick up and move a building.
So just move it back and then preserve it that way.
Absolutely.
Okay.
If you don't want to fiddle around with a house that you don't really like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at this, is this your desire? If you could build anything here to have this house?
No.
All right. And which is why I suggest that.
Yeah.
For a couple $1,000, you could pay someone to come up, lift it up, move it back 100 feet and drop it back down on a new foundation and preserve the house.
And still on the same
And
lot.
just take
On
out
the
the
same
kitchen.
lot.
And just take out the kitchen.
Right, and then you can
Or take
have
out the stove.
Then you can have option one. You could have option one if you just move that house out of the way.
Uh-huh.
It could be a shed. It could be
I mean,
anything you want to call it. It just can't have a kitchen.
I think to your point, Derek, that what I was alluding to was two separate structures in a similar way, and you just invest enough in the house to. I mean, I think it's kind of quaint. It's this random little tiny structure and on a street that people are going to see, but that if we move it to the back of the lot, it won't be seen, and it'll just be the Park Place neighborhood's best kept secret. But I mean, so I guess I'm interested in options that might consider the separation of the structures, and or we need to seriously review how the roof line works with this. But I mean, is there a way to preserve it and then use it as the cutest little lawn shed you've ever had, and how unconventional, but what an interesting story to tell that this historic house in the front of your real house is now home to your lawnmower and your your brew equipment or something like that.
It could actually be more than that. I mean, the key thing is if you're not doing through the ADU process, you can't have a kitchen and you can't separately rent it out. So if there is a bathroom and living area in there,
You can have a bathroom, but not a kitchen.
right? And you can have a sink and a stove and a hot pot. I mean, you can't. The idea is whoever is sleeping in that small cottage has full access to the main house. It's you renting, just like you rent a room in a house. The room you're renting or living in is part of the whole household.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the non-ADU way of having a bedroom and a detached structure.
like an in-laws,
Like a
separate
pool
detached
house,
in-laws,
a
full
sleeping
house, or,
pool house, without a pool.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to stay away from the use of this. You can make whatever use you have. I don't encourage you to lie or have an ADU in here. But I'm saying to do this right, in my opinion, it's going to be very difficult to try and attach the two. And I will just draw a diagram and I'll hold it up in front of the camera so everyone can see it. If this is your existing house,
You're
a vernacular would want to attach like that, which is a very different approach than what you have. And front, side street. That's
The
it,
old
straight
structure becomes a cross gable.
across. Right. Yeah, that's the tough part. And we don't really have enough room here to do it right, and that's why I don't think you should attach the two buildings.
Oh, well,
Use a breezeway.
And I'm not going to get back into a breezeway. So
actually, I like that input a lot because this is a rather expensive option, as it is. Option 2. So if we could still preserve that as a historic building, but I am kind of curious. Would you recommend? Do you think it would be more appropriate to keep it in the front or move it back a little?
I would tell you it's more historically appropriate to keep it in the front, and that's what ideally would happen. I'm not saying that you wouldn't get approved if it was towards the back.
Okay.
Because in my opinion, and I'm only one of 5, I would rather see this house remain with integrity than be bastardized and a shell of what it once was. And I think it would have more integrity in the back and being valued than being poorly cobbled together with something new.
So I have one other scenario. What about keeping the house as is, or maybe removing a rear, one of the lesser additions, but pretty much to the most extent keeping the, and then having the new house face Rock Street, completely separate. But see, I know what the key thing that the Granger's looking at, and it's a piece of the puzzle, is design guideline. I mean, that when you do an addition more than 50%, you get triggered for proportional street upgrades, and they're trying to do this first and then come back with the partition later, which when they would have the street improvements. This is a really complicated because there's Rock Street, which is all unimproved, and Hiram, and I know there's some utility issues. I think what they were trying to do is move forward with a less than 50% addition to stay under that threshold. So they could do a standalone, less than, they have the number, then they could just have it attached, and it's still less than 30% addition. Subsequent, this is a little bit new information, but subsequent, you could do a full, over 50% addition, detached, new home, determine what design guidelines make sense. And you can bond until you come to, you still put the money up, but you don't necessarily build the improvements. But that's assuming you're going to be coming within the next 2 years for a partition. So I know we had talked about that before as, it's that question of, do we just build the house that's going to go for the rent, and it's a bigger house and we'll get more rent, and we'll build in that bonding for that proportional 10% upgrade, or you build the upgrade, whatever it is, that's the 10% of the cost of the valuation of the addition.
Does it need to be bonded, or could the
They could do it.
applicant do a non-remonstrance agreement?
It's more than a non-remonstrance. They have to upgrade the infrastructure, the cost of 10% of the improvement when you're over 50%, and then work with Public Works on what that makes sense to do the 10%. So if there's a finite 10% that makes sense, that's going to, in a sense, pre-doing future conditions for the minor partition, that could work.
Could they appeal that to the city commission?
They can always do that. That's its own process.
Yep, that's something separate, but
So that's just, there's more things that the applicant is kind of swirling around trying to figure out what to do. But a non-50%, a 49% new construction in square footage could, I'm hearing from the board, could be appropriate if facing Rock Street and meeting our design guidelines for new construction.
yes. And
Question about the, so I'm not familiar with the square footage trigger on site.
And that's
improvements
not a historic, that is
Right,
just more,
right.
that's a planning development
They
services.
have a garage there. Does that count as any of the square footage that they intend to tear down?
that's a good question.
That is a good question, yeah. I would
That's
have
a lot
to
of
look
square
into it.
footage there.
Yeah.
That is a lot of square footage. The other item I would throw out there is
Wait till the partition before it's removed.
Yeah.
Could you, so you're saying if you tore that garage down, what's the implication there?
You just might lose that from your, you might be able to count that in the houses over square footage. So your 50% now just gets bigger.
Oh, okay, I see.
So that could potentially work. That's
Yeah.
correct.
And alternatively, could you, like you were saying, in order to, kind of preserve the historic value there and let as many people see it as they could, because the people that go down Rock Street every day, that's a significant number of people that are seeing it now. Could you move it and face this one towards Rock Street, move it back a little, and then you'd have room enough for a house in the front?
Yeah, I mean, I would have just practically, I probably would have to renotice it for the land use, but that's regardless of the finding.
It strikes me that I mean, if you move the house, I mean, you're having to build a whole new foundation for that house, plus the foundation for.
Is there a foundation under it now?
No.
No.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, that is the challenge of this design, because if you just touch it, it's going to collapse. The physical condition of the house is.
It is quite
very,
dilapidated.
Very dangerous.
Yeah.
Very
It's
dangerous.
it's dangerous. That's a good word.
If you want to untouch it, it's going to collapse soon. Because if you go around the house and look at the different sides toward the house, you're going to see, because there's no foundation, you're going to see how the roof, even the roof,
Mm-hmm.
has a different elevation, like maybe a foot, maybe 2 feet differences between the corner to corner. So it's already going down.
Mhm.
It's just a matter of
Sure.
Because it doesn't have a foundation, the I'm not sure which side, the Rock Street side is really slanting down several degrees.
In our, now this is a stretch, but we're having a conversation here. And forgive me for keeping you up here while we're deliberating, but
Because we're continued. We're not going to be a final.
sure. So, in several instances, I know that the commission listens to our findings and our suggestions, and if this applicant was to appeal those off-site improvements to the city commission, and this board made findings that in order to keep this residence and do it right, we recommended a non-remonstrance agreement.
Or
So this project would work and that house could.
and then any improvement should be done through the minor partition process.
Right.
Yeah, I mean,
I know that's a stretch.
Yeah, and I do know that there have been previous ones, and I have not been keeping up on how that's gone. Unless there's some recent direction, I would have to do some more research and get back with the applicants on that.
Okay.
About what I thought that their best chance would be for that.
So here's my thought. We don't have the authority to make that sort of decision or allowance, but the city commission does listen to our recommendations. And if we were to provide reasons of the overall why we think that would make sense, they may listen to that. So that's my thought there. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I like that. And I would kind of like to leave here tonight with like our best next step, our best plan. So any recommendations that Christina?
Well, it would seem to me that with sort of our general, Ken, have you mentioned anything? But Derek and I's conversation to this point that we would like to see the structure not added to in this way.
Okay.
And but that doesn't mean that an application with an addition couldn't be approved. It's just hard for us to see right now with the existing design how to kind of work through finding a path to get it approved. And in our conversation, it seems like that if there was a way that in further conversation with Christina, you can kind of work through a couple options. Because if anybody knows best, it's her at this point in terms of like the ins and outs of the city process. That how can you introduce a new house structure onto the site that preserves this one without.
So just wanted confirmation that the applicant, if they're doing a kind of a new detached structure, that they should follow the design guidelines for new construction for landmarks.
Correct.
Okay.
That is my opinion.
Okay. And so I can recommend that. And so the size of it and how it relates to the improvements, you're saying that's more of a technical issue, but if for some reason through something kind of outside the board's purview, they're able to get a kind of a larger house, and if it went through the design guidelines for new construction, that's a good direction, the board would say. So there's no, like, you're basically saying is build a new house, have this separate, have it all one lot. You can build a reasonably sized house if you want to go down that path financial wise, or you can do the 50% or 49% addition if you don't want to go the path financial wise.
Yep.
But do the new design guidelines for new construction.
Well, it just seems to me that the investment in getting the structure up to just habitable is going to be significant, and that an interim step where you kind of just prevent it from continuing to decline, and then maybe there's a future economic use for it.
Right. Well, in that sense, they could get a tenant in if this is a rental property and board up that house and work on that house on its own timeline as well. Because that, I mean, it's, in a sense, it's not, since it's a single family house, we're just kind of transferring the single family house part over here and kind of stabilizing the cottage part. And that could one day have sleeping areas and bathrooms be rehabbed and bring one of the roommates into that, or if it's a family, but it's all one.
And you're suggesting that the accessory dwelling issue is more to do with the fact that it's not owner occupied.
Correct. That's a separate.
And there's no real hope of that. We can't even foreshadow that potentially changing.
Yeah, that's its own legislative change that could happen tomorrow or 20 years from now.
Okay.
Encourage it to happen sooner than later.
But it could be transitioned at one point.
Sure.
Do you think then, because I'm not, it seems like Victor feels like it would not sustain, be able to withstand moving it?
Yeah, it's in a critical condition.
Well, Victor, let me ask you, if it's in critical condition that it couldn't be moved, how do you expect it to withstand a new roof load like you were proposing earlier?
Well, this new proposed addition is a separate structure.
But option one was adding on to the existing structure and pretty comprehensively, and that roof truss would have weighed on that front wall. How would it have held that?
Well, are we talking about the first option or the second option?
I'm going back to the first option.
Well, we
were thinking you would have to redo the wall.
Well,
the walls too.
The
So
truss
it was
is
getting
just
torn
a
down.
structural part that can be done.
Okay.
I don't want to go into details at this point, but I mean, designing the roof trusses, we can do a lot of things that will be standing separately, not necessarily, hanging over the existing structure.
So I'm kind of getting, let me summarize the direction I'm getting, and maybe this can help.
Yeah.
That for the most part, the board really doesn't see an appropriate way right now to attach. Because, there may be a magic one out there, but it's not obvious to anybody. Mm-hmm. 2, they really encourage you to just do a detached new house facing Rock Street. Okay. And the size of it can really be up to you financially, but we have design guidelines for new construction. And we can work together on, do you include the garage, the existing garage? What's the calculation of the size? Because it's really 2 things. I think the board is saying, yes, you can have a larger house. Like if we didn't have the requirement to do street improvements, I'm not hearing from the board that there's a magical threshold of too big, but other than what fits within our design standards of too big. So if you can go through our design standards for a normal, I'm just going to make up a number, 1,200 square foot house, with a detached garage, you're going to be fine, and you'll face Rock Street, and this little cottage will stay detached and can be kind of mothballed, or through our, we have demolition by neglect, so how do you stabilize it? And then you can work on it parallel or non-parallel. And then, but it's not an ADU. It doesn't have kitchen. It's not a separate dwelling unit, but it can have bedrooms and bathrooms.
And you
Or-
could also have a small hallway attaching to this so that it is its own master bedroom suite sort of thing.
So a breezeway may be appropriate if you want
Right.
to.
Or a small attachment of a hallway
Yeah.
to it.
Yeah.
So that way you don't have a as an invasive connection as well. I see. Well, I'm
Yeah.
looking
As
at
we're sampling
option two.
breezeways being very case by case basis.
A hallway is a breezeway that is enclosed by walls. Right.
After being here, we'd be very cautious on a breezeway.
Yeah.
Just
And I will tell you that you can't rip this house down unless it is designated, and I don't see that happening.
Okay. Well, I mean, I do like the idea of kind of like what you were saying. You know, you don't have to invest quite as much initially in a complete restoration of this house immediately.
Right.
We can work on both kind of simultaneously, like Christina was saying.
Yeah.
So I think I will work with you on coordinating, maybe I'll do a quick meeting at sometime soon, coordinate with our building division about what they will count as existing square footage, so it may be worth it not to tear down the garage right now if you can get a bigger.
And that's fine.
And then maybe that can get you what you want, and maybe then at a later date remove it as part of the partition, because then you'll be doing your street improvements. So that may be a scenario that'll work and get you a pretty decent house at 49%.
Yeah, I like that.
And then, so what I need to do, just so the board knows, we'll need to probably meet soon, because I'll need to see if it needs to be renoticed. If there's anything like a preservation incentive or something that needs to be renoticed in the paper or not. I'll just be sending out in the next week or two revised drawings. So if you can get a revised drawing the next 2 weeks, I can get them to the neighborhood and then get them into the October staff report.
And not to go into too much detail here, because I know we can do it later, but the one thing that I'm still a little bit unclear on is when you say the 49%, meaning what?
You're not adding more than 50% to the size of the existing house. And I think what we need to check is house and other accessory buildings on site.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that if you can keep the garage, you're right, that may very well bump your size of kind of that addition, and that the main new house might be able to be
okay.
like a
Yeah.
kind of a normal tenanting size
Yeah,
house.
because that's kind of what we were thinking in that area compared to the other house on Rock Street. If you had 1,100 or 1,200 square foot house, it would.
Yeah, you might be able to do that. So that's really a call with our building official and our community development director.
Okay.
But I think the key is having kind of the revised drawings. If you want to get into the October meeting, we will need to kind of process through the neighborhood association within the next couple weeks.
Yeah, I think we want to keep moving as fast
Okay.
as we can.
So,
at this point.
and I would suggest that that we would be willing, or at least I would be willing to consider whatever findings seem appropriate in the interest of preserving the structure while also continuing to add to the economic use of that property. Because otherwise, it's unless somebody. I mean, there are people that like tiny houses. There are television shows about it, but
Right.
that this property, would be improved economically if we're able to figure out how to get the second structure on there.
Well, so right now we just have a move to continue this to the October meeting.
I move to continue.
A second?
Mr. Basinger,
Aye.
Mr. Stone,
Aye.
Mr. Metzen.
Aye.
And then if the applicant wants to email me tomorrow, maybe we can set up a time to kind of go over some of those detail issues. Sound good? Okay. Thank you very much. This was an odd one we had, but I thought it was worth it to move forward because with design advice you lose a month. So this we kind of could get it going. So just wanted to let you know I still haven't heard from Ms. McGriff about our continuation, and my phone just died.
We'll give her 5 more seconds.
But what
Thank
one
you.
option,
Thanks a lot.
thank
Thanks.
you, is to if you're available next Tuesday,
Next
like
Tuesday.
right. I mean, we could do it right any 5. I mean, the idea is 2 things will happen. Either it is the kind of the waiver, the request for continuous is removed. I'll get it in writing, and the board just has to meet, like, for 10 minutes on Tuesday at like 5 or 5:30, and we just record it for 10 minutes. And then if she doesn't do that, I'll just put a note that says it's continued to the October meeting.
Next Tuesday, I can do it 4 or 6:30.
I'm flexible.
4 is pushing it a little bit, but can probably manage.
4:30?
I
Will
have
4:30 work for you?
Yeah. I have a book promotion deal going on that afternoon.
What about the 6th, which is Thursday?
I cannot do the 6th.
Well, the City Commission is on at 7 o'clock. I wonder.
On Wednesday?
I don't see the City Commission doing any urban renewal. So I'm wondering if we could just do a 5 to 5:15 on City Commission night, Wednesday.
What time?
Like 5 to 5:15 on Wednesday.
I can do
Or
Wednesday.
4:45 or something like that.
I can do any time on Wednesday.
Now, I know Bob won't be back, but what about Claire?
It'd be nice to have the 3 that were. I mean, she can be an addition, but it'd be nice to have the 3 that.
And what is the reason why we're trying to get this in?
I think just allowing not to have to wait. And so if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. I think the
Yeah.
idea is if there's a time that meets everybody, we don't have to
Right.
let the applicant wait. They can get moving with their building permit. This
I'm
next
traveling
month.
that day. I'm sorry.
What works
Let's
the
go
next?
back to the 4th.
Monday
10th?
would work. Monday the 3rd. Tell her to move it.
She wants a birthday on weekend.
I mean, I can do Monday the 3rd as
But I-
well.
Monday the 10th works for me.
Oh, the 10th? Let me see.
Oh, no, that doesn't.
And you said the Thursday, the 6th didn't work for you. Okay, so if people said 4 o'clock on Tuesday worked, the 4th?
I
Well,
think
10th
we
is
could do
Columbus Day, and
No, 4 o'clock on the 4th.
the
Are
4th.
we getting consensus that that could work?
Yeah.
I can do 4 o'clock on the 4th,
Yep.
Okay.
but no
So-
later than that.
Okay, so what if right now, and if it all falls apart, I'll just put a sign in that says it's continued to the October meeting.
Okay.
But if we could have them reopen HR 1603 and continue this meeting to Tuesday, October 4th from 4 to 4:15 at the City Commission chambers. If between now and then I can get confirmation from Ms. McGriff that she is comfortable removing the request for continuance, then we can make the motion for approval based on our deliberation. And if she does not want to, then I'll just put a sign up that it's de facto continued to the October meeting. Does that work?
Okay.
That works. It's on my calendar.
So we
Okay.
need a motion, apparently.
Just someone can move to what I said.
Move to what Christina said.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, Mr. Basinger,
Aye.
Mr.
To
Stone,
what
Aye.
Christina said.
Mr. Metzen.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all.
We are adjourned.
Thank you, and Jonathan, you can go to your event. I do have salads in the back for people.